Hi there everyone, welcome back to On the Flip Side. My name is Adam Shawwalker, your host, and today we're going to be checking out this new Boris album, Heavy Rocks. This is the third album from Boris to be titled Heavy Rocks, the first two releasing in 2011 and 2002 respectively. This is also the second album from Boris to release this year, with a W having dropped back in January. An album that I thought stood really far apart from a lot of the band's older material, whereas all of the Heavy Rocks projects are psyched out, sludgy rock albums. W was a much sleeker, much more gentle touch as far as Boris's output goes. And of course, these guys are not strangers when it comes to experimentation, with multiple noise collaborations with Merzbow, and there was some bleed of that style, those aesthetics, into that last project, W. And here on Heavy Rocks, a lot of the same elements are pulled. A lot of the same more extreme ends of rock, jazz, and metal are all layered in this mix that is as cacophonous as possible. I mean, the first track, She Is Burning, with its twisted, hellish brass instrument passages, sounds like if you were to take like ska and actually try and make something good with it. She Is Burning really just bursts onto the scene too. Like, the whole track runs at a blistering punk-heavy pace that is completely unrelenting, and the intensity does not drop off at all. Heavy Rocks, through its duration, is almost this same level of over-the-top theatrics through the entire album. The track Cramper hits again with this really in-your-face blasting bass part and these squealing guitars, which are paired with some really bizarre vocal parts which sort of harmonize above the track in this style that's kind of reminiscent of like Bill Manspeaker's work with Green Jelly. My Name Is Blank reminds me a lot of like early 90s Butthole Surfers material, and I mean, a lot of this stuff does, but this track in particular is just so ripping and roaring with this alternative punk rock energy. The sheer density of this track is kind of just impressive on its own. Blah 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 opens with these shrill saxophone noises that feel like they're meant to pull a little bit from the noise-heavy part of their back catalog. That then breaks into this moody bridge with these big sweeping sax parts and strange instrumental breaks. The vocal work here is at a peak of strangeness and variety. It's all around one of the more interesting moments on this album. Question 1 takes some of the style from the last track and brings it back around to the more pure punk rock sound for its intro. It is a really well-paced track that kind of feels like it could be a song for like a soundtrack of some kind. It's incredibly hectic and becomes a bit more jarring the further the song you get, with this whiplash from a very fast-paced technical segment into these careening, wailing guitars and deep soundscapes. And again, I can't help but be impressed with these insane vocals that seem to delve further and further into these soaring highs and almost death metal-like growls. Nosferatu is, for me, probably the highlight of this album, with its very immediate presence felt in these quaking, low-tuned guitars and thunderous bass parts. The sound of this track is just massive, and it reminds me a lot of Boris's early material, especially off of like Akuma no Uta. I do also really enjoy the Swans-esque reed instruments that are used on this track. It definitely makes this one of the most unique tracks on this album, and it does all of these crazy, weird things while blending these psychedelic sludge metal riffs into these huge trudging passages that at points venture into the freeform more so than not. Ruins tighten things back up for a song that kind of feels like it could be the intro for like an anime or something, with all this big thrashy commotion and anthemic vocals, which are all pretty good. And it does really feel like this is like them trying to reach peak speed metal or thrash for this album, where it's hitting right on that kind of post-crossover sound. This one's just really solid. The sound of Ghostly Imagination comes almost entirely out of left field, with this sort of Slavic hard bass beat that is also a bit reminiscent of Gabber. It's incredibly heavy, pulling from all of the same places as the rest of this album, but it just pounds with this intensity, not unlike a lot of classic industrial projects. There's some great vocal work on this track that is super in line with the early Skinny Puppy material, and that main beat almost sounds like something that could have been off of like The Last Temptation of Reed by Lard. I think this track and Nosferatu, for me, are definitely the main attractions for this project. Chained hits an even heavier, slower vein with some blasted out feedback heavy riffs that lead into the main segments of the track, which is just blow after blow trading between high tempo breaks and slower, almost black metal influenced transitions musicians. This track especially feels like it hits some of the same notes as some of their work with Merzbow, with lots of whirring synths during some of the refrains. And the final track, Not Last Song, is probably the closest sound and style-wise to the previous Boris album W. It's just as experimental as the rest of the tracks here, with a bit more of the sensibilities of that album. It doesn't necessarily feel in line thematically with the rest of Heavy Rocks. Though that being said, its inclusion here feels very welcome as a closing track. I'm a big fan of the trembling piano and dynamic vocal work. And as far as production goes too, I'm really liking the building suspense and noise over the course of the song. It feels very much like a Trent Reznor moment. Lots of great, very intentionally held notes that become just more and more agonizing the longer they are drawn out. You know, I think there's some really great stuff on this album. I'm a bit more of a fan of the second half of the album, where the experimentation tends to become a little more commonplace and is a little bit more out there. Though the first half of this album is definitely not a sleeper. Lots of great material there too. I do still think I liked the last Boris album a little bit more, but Heavy Rocks does absolutely still live up to the previous two entries to its absolute fullest. I'm thinking Heavy Rocks 2022 is a solid 8. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of the album in the comments below, and remember to like and subscribe, and check out my Instagram, my Reverb, and my Depop. Links to those are in the description below. Thank you all so much again, and we'll see you on the flip side.